I do appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm a very distinguished group, and I do appreciate it. Let me look at this, figure it out real quick. All right, that's just a little information about me. I'll just say, if you're thinking about or know someone thinking about putting together a pellet production operation, call me, please. I will save you millions. So the wood pellet uses, I'm fortunate to follow these speakers because they have mentioned a lot of things about pellets, and I'm going to mention a little more about it, but barely scratching the surface. So please jot down a question as we go, and we'll talk more about it at the end. Well, let's go back to this. Right now in the U.S., there's a lot of pellets being produced. It's going to two places, domestic and international. Our domestic use is limited. It's less than a drop in the ocean. It's going to heat. That's personal home heating, your wood grills, barbecuing, things like that, and pet products. Very little, if any, is actually going to energy production like it is in Europe. So on the international side, the vast majority of what we ship and export is for power generation. Why aren't we doing it here more? Gas. We're sitting on oceans of natural gas, and it's way more efficient, and it's just no way around it. Economically, there's no way to justify using wood pellets in the U.S., unfortunately. Really, you can't do it anywhere else in the world either without the subsidies, but because of all the accords and things that's been put together and mandated by foreign governments. For instance, in the UK, a $100 utility bill, $10 of that's going to subsidize wood pellets, theoretically. Don't hold me to the numbers, but basically. So there are small scale opportunities with pellets in this country, but it requires bagging. You know, you can bag it up and sell it at Home Depot or wherever for the grill or for the pets or for the house to heat it. But it requires a much higher quality, meaning you got to screen it, and there can't be any fines in it. So that's just a higher manufacturing cost altogether. Plus you got additional handling of bagging and so on and so forth. But there is a large-scale opportunity, and especially here in Tennessee. It is a crying shame that we don't have 4 pellet mills in this state lined up east to west, right in the middle of the state. But there's a perceived barrier being logistics of getting it to the ports, and I contend that that's a perceived barrier. It can be got around, and it can be got around economically. And the world is poised for another very significant increase in pellet demand, and where that's going to be is in the East, and that's been mentioned too, in Japan and Korea especially. And if you're wondering why, I think Fukushima. That meltdown is a knee-jerk reaction. They shut down any nuclear plants, and they don't want them anymore, doesn't matter, and now they're going toward the pellet industry. And then also you can think of can't even think of the other accord that came out, that's the Kyoto Accord. You know, that was kind of the beginning of all of it years ago. But look, I want you to look at this map for just a second. That is an arbitrary line through Tennessee right there. You can see we're just surrounded by pellet mills. There is not a dime's worth of difference in the logistics between that and Viva plant right there in Mississippi and us. It's really not. It can be done. I went the wrong way, sorry. And this is how you do it. You do it with rail. There's no shortage of railroads and rail lines in Tennessee. You strategically place your facilities, and you creatively put together a business plan that gets them point A to point B cost effectively. We can't touch any of that today. That's a week-long seminar topic to discuss, but it's here, and we have the resource, and we need to do this for the state. The industry needs it. The forests need it. I've been visiting every sawmill in the state for the past few months, and I have continued to hear we don't have any markets for our pulpwood or our chips. We can't harvest the logs because the landowners don't want to sell their timber because they don't have a market for their pulpwood or their chips. So it's a compounding problem. And my presentation is going to be short because I'm hoping I'm going to generate some questions that we can discuss a little bit at the end. But this is a key right here. This was mentioned. This is Drax in the UK. They are the largest single point user of wood in the world. More wood goes to this single point than any other single point on the planet. And it's upwards of 10 million tons. And it all goes as pellets. And it's hardwood and softwood. I worked for them for several years. I've sent millions of tons of pellets to them. I've been to this facility, and it is a great, great operation the way they've put it together. And it's the UK, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, just to name a few, but they're the big pellet players in terms of purchasing. The problem is, to get a plant built, there's a catch-22, and that's the real problem. It's not the logistics necessary. This is what makes it the hardest to get a pellet plant started anywhere. It doesn't matter where. Because if you go to Drax, say, hey, I got the best place on the planet for a pellet mill. I want to build it. Will you buy them from me? They said, yes, we would love to buy them from you. Bring us some proof that you can build it, that you got the money to do it, and we'll sign a contract. And they're like, great. And I participated in this, I know. So, great. You've got a handshake, they'll buy them. You go to the financier. Same story. Got a great place, got all the wood, got the plan, whole thing. Will you finance me? Yeah, we'll finance you. Just, you need to go bring us a contract that you can sell them, and we'll cut you a check. You're caught in the middle. Can't get it done. Neither one are willing to blink. Before I went to work for Georgia Biomass, which is the largest single producer of pellets in the U.S., 750,000 tons a year in South Georgia, I was approached by another outfit, and that's exactly what happened to us. We were ready to go, and we would have actually been ahead of Georgia Biomass and geographically right on top of them, but we couldn't do it, couldn't do the financing for this very reason. And this is Georgia Biomass right here. It's in Waycross, Georgia. That's the anatomy of a pellet plant. Upper left-hand corner is the wood yard. Come down, you have to the lower left quadrant is the bark building. In the middle, that's the the chip storage. And both of those are actually undercover. And I'll admit, I was the first one that poo-pooed that, didn't think that was necessary, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But then to the right of the center, that's the drying island, and then you come down and you see the hammer mills and the pellet mill building right there to the right corner, and then the very last little square on the right is the pellet loadout. That was my job. I got all the pellets from the plant to Europe, and best job I ever had. Loved it. Met a lot of great people. But scalability is another issue you have to consider if you think about something like this, and the reason is leverage. You cannot deal with a railroad or shipping companies in low volume. You just can't. You can't afford it. And not to mention, you're going to drive your wood costs down too. The more volume you buy, the more leverage you have. But the logistics are the biggest thing with size, because you got to be steady, and you got to have enough volume to make it worth their while. So how do you do that in Tennessee? Well, I think there is a different model that's a possibility, and this is kind of spitballing. I don't have anything already put together. This is something I just think about a lot, and I'd love to help somebody put it together. But a centralized cooperative where, say, on either side of Nashville within 100 miles, you put something like this with a 25,000 ton to 50,000 ton dome storage in place. And let that be your centralized location that you buy from anybody and everybody that can produce the right quality of pellet, whether it's they got one pellet mill or 10. It might be a sawmill, it might be a small pellet, 100,000 ton a year pellet mill, but that gives smaller folks the ability to produce a pellet without having to invest $150 million. But then it also allows you or whomever's putting in these facilities to invest less and buy from them and then go and sell to the end user. You're consolidating a lot of smaller users under one name that you can then control quality and have the leverage for logistics. I don't know if anyone or everyone knows what a unit train is, but that's where you own the cars or you lease the cars. They always stay together, they're never broken apart, and they aren't scaled in a hump yard. A hump yard being where they break the trains apart, go over hill, and they've got tracks going everywhere, and they weigh them and turn them into other trains that are going to different places in the world. The unit train just goes there and back all together. And that is a key factor that has to happen, especially if you're working in Tennessee to get pellets to a port. So that's something you'd have to think about is wherever you are centralizing your logistics, it's got to be on a railhead and it's got to be on a line that goes all the way to the ocean, to a port that can then handle bulk size carriers. That is a key. Everybody thinks it's got to be done on a barge. It's got to go down the Tim Tom. No, it don't. You can get 100 to 300 rail cars all the way to a port just as reasonable as you can get 15, 20, 30 barges down a river, and probably not, and then you don't have to worry about the water level, because that's what happened to Dixie Pellet years ago. Water levels went down, they got caught, pellets self-heated, they lost their quality. It was just a cascading failure. So this is just another model potential. Charter parties. That's just a fancy way to say shipping contract with the ocean-going vessel owner. And again, it's that consistency. They want to know you're going to ship 25 to 100,000 tons of pellets a month. Think about that just a minute. That's a lot of pellets. So that's why that 450,000 ton a year pellet facility is kind of your sweet spot in size if you're going to be a single unit, if you're not consolidating a lot of volume from smaller places. If you're going to be a standalone, have all your own contracts and ship just your pellets somewhere, that's about a ship and a half a month. So, 1 month of one ship, next month 2 ships. And it just kind of alternates back and forth. And you're going to need anywhere from 50 to 90,000 tons of storage capability at the port facility in order to make all that happen. And this is what it looks like on a unit train. You're for instance, on a 96-mile haul, or 100, rounded off 100 miles, you got to go for 100 miles from production to port. That's what this was at Georgia Biomass. So I had 170 rail cars. This is just kind of give you an idea of the thought process. 170 rail cars. That meant I had 40 cars at any given time at my plant, because I didn't have any storage at my plant. The pellets went in a car as soon as they're made. Okay? Then That means I had 40 rail cars outbound heading to the port. I had 40 cars at the port discharging, and I had 40 cars coming back. So I always had rail cars here. And trust me, you don't want to let them run out of rail cars because they got to shut the plant down. And that gets expensive very fast. And then that creates unemployment very fast. So I spent some very tense hours sometimes waiting on the rail cars to come in on both ends because you have demurrage as well. You don't want the ship sitting there waiting on that last 4,000 tons of pellets to finish off the trip, waiting on the train. And the analogy I use with people trying to express the seriousness of waiting was that demurrage costs 25 cents a second. So how long you guys stand over the bucket dropping your own quarters in before you start getting tense about it? So it was effective. And that's the other thing with the railroad. I don't know how much they've dealt with the railroad, but I found the key was never cry wolf. Don't jump up and down, be like you're going to be upset with them or anything like that unless it's real, because they really don't care, because they got a whole lot more business, and they're a big machine, and they can't change what they're doing quickly. It's like turning an aircraft carrier versus turning a rowboat. So you got to think way ahead and try not to put them in a bind where they got to do something quickly. Again, hence large unit trains, because if you're depending on a railroad to bring you empty cars all the time, while they stay in a consistent, path, it kind of hiccups along sometimes. So you don't want to be dependent on their timing, because there was always a joke. There's watches and there's railroad watches, and they're not the same. They don't tell time the same. So anyway, I'll belabor that point. I talked about leverage before. That goes back to the size of your plant, or the amount of material that you can produce and keep going to the port is critical. It's an economy of scale. The more you can do and the quicker you can turn it, the less it's going to cost you in freight and the higher your quality is going to be. And I'm going to talk about that very last. Don't have a slide on it, but I want to talk to you about it. So the smallest vessel you'd ever consider shipping pellets on is a Handy Max. That's about a 25 to 30,000 ton load. You break that down to rail cars, it's about 300 rail cars. That's doable. So theoretically, if you were able to have a rail car fleet of about 300 cars here in this state somewhere, and you send them in unit trains of 75, 80, 100, something like that, you could load a ship hot. You could load it directly from the rail cars if you had the storage capability at your site to load them, send them. The other set is coming back. You're loading it while this one's discharging. That one's sent. This one has come back, and it loads, and then has gone back again by the time that ship is finished. You get 3 days. So you would automatically have to pay a little bit of demurrage on the ship, but you could work that into the numbers. I'm confident that would be a workable model for this part of the world to get pellets from here to a port. And depending on the design of everything, you can make all that a lot faster if need be. But you're still held to the speed of the railroad. If you're going from here to Mississippi, or here to Savannah, or to Charleston, or up in Virginia somewhere, you're going to probably look at a 3 or 4 day turn time on those rail cars. So you're looking at about an 8-day lay can on the ship. That's doable. That's very doable. And that gets better though the bigger you go. Supermax is another common size for pellet shipments. Panamax, not quite as much. Supermax, you're looking at a 50,000 ton load, 50 to 60,000 tons, and a Supermax, 78 to 80,000 metric tons. Here's the problem with that. You got to balance the quality with the cost. It's a risk-benefit analysis, because the longer you store pellets, the hotter they get. You put pellets in a dome or a silo, you got 2 weeks before the temperature starts going up. And that's kind of what I want to end my talk on is quality. So like any organic product, you pile it up and put it under pressure, it's going to get hot. Mulch pile, bark pile, chip pile, whatever it is. It's sugar explosions. That's a whole nother topic too. We could talk about explosions. Been through 2 or 3 of those. I prefer a model of a Handymax over a Panamax, because I can turn those ships quicker depending on my flow rate. And I would rather do that and pay a little more than to constantly be fighting the temperature and the quality problems, because what happens with the pellets, when you pile them up and they get hot underneath, they break back down into dust. Well, there's quality specs, and you can't have but just so much of that product going on the ship that size back to dust, even though that's exactly what they're going to do to it when it gets there. They're going to take the pellet and they're going to grind it back up to dust and blow it into the furnace just like it's coal dust. The only reason that we pelletize, or anybody pelletizes the wood to send it overseas, is freight, because you can get 3 times the volume on that ship than you can in the form of dust, and you don't have the dust, which is very explosive. So when it gets there, they don't want the dust either, because they've got to handle it. And when you handle it, the dust goes in the air, and it's just all kinds of risks and dangers and aggravations and problems with that dust content. So there is a spec, a dust spec for every ship. There is a temperature spec for every ship, and there is a third-party surveyor for every ship that is steady watching it constantly the whole time. And it gets out of spec, theoretically, they could say, no, we're not taking it. And that's the kiss of death. You just can't have that. That's a $5 million load of product there that somebody will take it, but you'll get pennies on the dollar for it. So all that being said, a Handymax at 25,000 tons, when you get things rolling good, you can do every 2 to 3 weeks. And that lets you turn your product so that you never get into that heat spike, because you're discharging and sending it, which cools it and stops that process, every 2 to 3 weeks. And what it looks like it's kind of a reverse S curve, where that temperature goes steady up, and just about the time everybody gets ready to panic, it flattens off. But even though it stopped going up, it has broken down that center core of pellets. And now you've got a quality problem. If you leave it long enough, it'll spike and do it again. Then you might have a fire problem. And there's been several documented cases of fires in Texas, and then most recently in Chesapeake. And that is catastrophic. You just don't want that. So anyway, that's kind of my take on the scalability of pellets, what it would take, what some of the possibilities are, who the players are. I think there's just so much opportunity for the state of Tennessee. We need it. The industry is going to need it more so soon, most likely, and it is doable. It's just going to take some out-of-the-box thinking. So, did I generate any questions? Oh, no. Oh, good. We got one.
We have time, or just a real quick briefing? Yeah, we'll take one brief, and then we can. I got all sorts of questions.
Well, we can talk afterwards, too.
How about the market, exploded in Europe? Do you see continued market demand for pellets?
Well, yeah, because what I think is going to, well, that's what I think is going to happen is with Japan and Korea, when they come online, and the only reason they haven't already is a cultural thing, in my humble opinion, because, you know, in their culture, the managers of the facilities that's going to use the pellets, that's something new. And if it's a failure, they're going to lose face, and that's the most awful thing on the planet in their culture. So they're very slow to adopt anything new. But when they finally do, it's going to create a sucking hole in Europe, because a lot of the volume that's going to Europe is coming out of Canada, and a lot of it's coming out of Western Canada. So anything that can go west will go west. You know, there's going to be a break point, and so that volume, when it goes west, and it was going east, that's going to create a lot of demand. That's my opinion. Yeah.
So Shane is going to be here. He's exhibiting in the next room, so please go talk to him. I look forward to it. Let's thank Shane for his time today. Thank you.